Good morning and welcome to the webinar today on procurement support. Go4Growth is supporting the Durham Police and Crime Commissioner in their current and live procurement for the provision of specialist counselling services for victims of sexual violence. I need to firstly just apologise for not being able to join you in person. Normally I would be, but today I need to be elsewhere. But you are in the very capable hands of my colleague Lauren. She will have done housekeeping with you prior to this starting, so I'll just reiterate, if there are any questions, please do put them in the Q&A. Feel free to introduce yourselves on chat if you should like to. If there are any questions that we are unable to answer in this session today, we will answer them in slower time. As Lauren said, also the slide deck will be sent out to all registrants for today's session, and there will also be a copy along with the recording of the session posted on the Go4Growth LinkedIn page. And so just to introductions. So my name is Gillian Askew. I am one of 3 co-founders of Go4Growth. And I'm a procurement professional by trade with just shy of 30 years experience in both private and public sectors. I'm also a long-standing micro-business owner and I run a social enterprise. My area of specialism is in supporting local economic development through procurement and commissioning, and that's all about ensuring that social and economic outcomes are embedded in everything that we do in the public sector. Lauren will have done her introduction, but I'm joined by my colleague Lauren Siddons, who is the procurement assistant at Go4Growth. And I wanted to just give you a brief overview of the relationship between Go4Growth and the Durham Police and Crime Commissioner. We work for the public sector. We are fully funded by the public sector. So what that means is all of the support that we can give to marketplace providers around process, around upskilling in preparedness and preparation for public sector procurements is done so at no cost to providers. And one of our customers is Blue Light Commercial, who is working closely with Durham Police and Crime Commissioner's Office. And so we are working with Durham PCC to help support this procurement for the provision of specialist counselling services for victims of sexual violence, to provide process support to help providers who may have bid before but not for some time, or may be used to grant funding environments, and this may be the first time that actually they're ever going through a commissioned service procurement competition. And so we are picking up those general process questions on behalf of Durham Police and Crime Commissioner's Office. We are supporting them so that they can help providers with the technical questions, cost questions, service delivery, specification questions. We will take any questions and provide as much support as possible on general and process inquiries. And if you've already downloaded the invitation to tender, you will have seen a section in the ITT that highlights the work that Go4Growth is doing with Durham Police and Crime Commissioner. So what we'll cover today in the session is around the use of EU Supply, which is the procurement portal, and that's also known as Blue Light. We will look at expressing interest in the opportunity, getting the documents and understanding the application itself. And then we're going to talk through some common pitfalls that procurement professionals have identified that would be useful to talk through to potential bidders so that you can avoid those common pitfalls in your submission. And so finding the opportunity, there are several ways that you can find this opportunity, and actually plenty of opportunities in the public sector. The opportunity is currently visible on Contracts Finder and Finder Sender Service. Now those two are government search portals really for search engines, if you like, for want of a better term. Contracts Finder and Finder Tender Service differ only really by value. So for a wider public sector organisation, good practice says that over 25,000 in total contract value, you should be advertising those opportunities on Contracts Finder. If it's a central government department, that would be a mandate, and that is at £10,000. And the Finder Tender Service replaced the official journal of the European Union, where over threshold opportunities would have to be by law advertised when we were part of the European Union. However, Finder Tender Service is now where over threshold opportunities need to be advertised, and actually you can find opportunities over £118,000 total contract value on the Find a Tender service. What you can't do is submit your bid through either Contracts Finder or Find a Tender service. They are a search engine, and as such you can set alerts up in those search engines. You can see on screen that there's a couple of YouTube video links there. So we've created really quick 4 or 5 minute tutorials to show you how to navigate Contracts Finder and also how to navigate the Find a Tender service. Every procurement opportunity, especially over threshold, almost every procurement opportunity actually will generally be completed and submitted via a procurement portal. And blue light organisations typically use EU supply blue light. And that's important to note that it's blue light because there is EU supply for your tender for Yorkshire local authority opportunities, but it's blue light that you would be bidding through. And in both Contracts Finder and Find a Tender service, there will be links to push you out to EU supply blue light for those particular opportunities, or actually indeed whichever procurement portal is in use. What we've already done is created again a YouTube video tutorial that shows you how to register for and navigate the EU supply blue light system. But this is the procurement portal that you'll need to be registered for and you'll need to be in order to access the documents for the competition, the opportunity, and to submit your response to that opportunity. And the first step that you would do in any public sector opportunity that you are wishing to submit against or indeed look at the documents for would be through what's called an expression of interest process. And in essence, what that does is exactly what it says on the tin. It expresses interest. Generally speaking, this is anonymous. So generally speaking, when you express interest, what the contracting authority, the customer, will see is that somebody has expressed interest, but they won't necessarily see who. In lots of cases, depending on how the system is set up, they won't actually know who's submitting a bid until the competition closes on the closing date, and then the system will show those bids. So that expression of interest, it isn't 100% anonymous. It does depend on how systems are set up, but generally speaking, you can do so without your identity being known. That may or may not matter, but it's worth just knowing when contracting authorities can see what. The expression of interest process differs by portal, so how you actually express your interest will be dependent on the portal. Because we're talking about this particular opportunity with Durham PCC, we have created a YouTube tutorial again on how to express interest in this particular procurement portal, EU Supply for Blue Light. It's worth noting that getting the documents is automatic in almost all portals, if not all portals now. So years ago, you had to wait for the contracting authority to email you the relevant documents after you had expressed interest, but now it is automatic. What you'll see in the video is that there's a prompt in the screen that you're redirected to as soon as you've clicked accept to express your interest, called access documents, and all the documents that you need are in there. The competition timelines I'll go through shortly with you, but once you can access those documents, it is always my personal advice to download everything and read every single document top to tail, noting any questions that you have. Read them fully, read them thoroughly, read them early, and compile any questions that you might have. And so for this particular ITT, now an ITT stands for Invitation to Tender. It's a procurement term. It's just an acronym for Invitation for Tender. And really what the ITT is the bid documents, if you like, or the bid document itself. In this particular case, the contract duration is for 36 months. There are 2 12-month extensions potentially on offer, but please note that extensions are not guaranteed business. So the minimum term for this particular opportunity, subject to performance, is 36 months. And the start date for this opportunity is the 3rd of October 2022. And that initial term then will run to the 2nd of October 2025. As I've said, please do read all of the documents carefully. We're not going to cover everything in this webinar. And of course, this webinar is not designed to be exhaustive, and it's not designed to be legal advice. If you are in need of legal advice, please do seek that independently. For example, if there is a TUPE section, you're asked to do your own work on TUPE, although it may not apply in this particular case, but you're asked to just make certain for yourself that you're happy with that. If you need legal advice on TUPE, then please do go get it. As I've said before, submissions will generally go through a procurement portal. That's definitely the case in this procurement. So your submission will be entered via the EU supply portal only. So written or emailable submissions are not accepted. And your submission must be submitted by the 27th of June at 12 noon. That is unlikely to change. However, there is a thing called clarification questions, and if extensions are granted or if anything changes, you will get a note through the EU supply portal, and it may also be included in the clarification question returns. So it's a good idea, even when you've downloaded all the documents, to keep an eye on that system, check the clarification question returns, and check if there are any emails in the system that you need to know about. You should get an alert to your work email, but my advice is during a competition, don't rest on your laurels, do check and recheck. There are sometimes, not often, system issues when you're submitting. They can happen, so we would always advise, as would contracting authorities, to submit in good time. So if the deadline is 12 noon, pressing the button on your submission at 2 minutes to noon is probably not the best idea. If there was a system issue at that point, it could in fact be quite catastrophic to your submission. What they are saying is after 12 noon, and every authority is the same, nothing will be accepted after that time. And because system issues can happen, do try and submit it in good time of the deadline of 12 noon. In this particular competition, there are gateway questions. They're in Appendix C. And a gateway question is sometimes known as a threshold question. They are questions where if you don't meet the criteria, you would not be able to progress further. So it's a good idea to have a read through of those early, make sure that you will pass those. They are generally self-cleaning. In that I mean, you will be saying that whether yes or no you have been you've been found to be fraudulent, for example, in the past. You are required to submit the answer on a self-cleaning basis. You are not required to evidence that. But of course, should you misrepresent information in a tender, that could, if that were found at a later date, invalidate your submission. On this particular tender, from an evaluation perspective, bids are scored with 40% on price or total cost. And technical questions, which are sometimes known as quality, is got a evaluation criteria of 60% of the total marks. There are also several lots that are geographical in this particular tender, and you may bid for multiple lots. There's a boundary map within the ITT detailing the different lots. Have a look at the evaluation criteria in the bid. It will be in the ITT document. It will talk you through how the scores are being put to each question and what the weighting of that question is. We would also say look out for things like word count limits and page limits and other instructions to look out for. So if, for example, there is a 500 word count or a 1200 word count, as there is in this particular ITT, don't go over this limit. Anything you do submit in excess of a word count will simply be ignored or even potentially redacted. And what that means is it would be removed. And if it was being redacted or removed, it would be done so prior to evaluation. As I've mentioned, the weightings that are in there, they'll help you understand the priority that the Police and Crime Commissioner in this case places on the question. So when you're looking at the score versus the weighting criteria, that will help you work out how much emphasis you want to place on your answer. You should note in this particular invitation to tender the timescales for all procurement opportunities that you are submitting against. It's a good idea to have a look at the timescales. For example, in this one, the clarification question window is open until the 20th of June 2022. That's in the ITT document. And of course, one of the documents that you'll download is the specification. From a personal perspective, when I bid, the first thing I do is to read the specification to make sure that I'm happy that I can deliver the service that the authority wishes to procure, and I can deliver it in the way that they want to procure it. Technical questions should be answered when you're submitting your bid with that specification in mind. That is, in essence, what they are wanting to buy. So here at Go for Growth, we asked a number of public sector organisations what they thought the top things were that providers can often, through no intent and certainly no lack of effort or skill, but potentially get wrong. And so these were the top 10 items really that came back, and we wanted to run through them today just to bring them to your attention. Some of them sound so obvious when we talk through them together, but having both bid myself, I know that I've fallen foul of them myself as a provider, and as an evaluator in procurement, I have seen it happen, all of these before, and so I think it's worth just running through it. So not answering the question just obviously feels really self-explanatory. However, when you're reading the question in conjunction with the specification, answer the question not what you think they want, because ultimately that can result in lower scores. So if it says something like, how do you embed something? How can you evidence X, Y, or Z? Then make sure that you do all of those things. If it's talking about your values, then you need to talk about how you embed your values, not necessarily talk about how you might put together policies that might reflect those values. It's about really getting into the ribs of the question and answering it accordingly, and especially with that specification in mind. Submitting all of the documentation, again, just feels really obvious. However, it can often be a place where things do get missed. So that can manifest itself in two ways. For example, a question might ask for a specific piece of evidence like a risk register, and there might be narrative around a risk register, but no actual risk register provided itself. So if the question is asking for examples of documentation, do include it. And standard forms that you need to fill out. So generally in a public sector procurement, you'll be asked to fill out a form of tender. You'll be asked to complete a form around Freedom of Information Act, etc. Make sure that you've gone through the checklist, which is usually on an ITT, to make sure you've submitted all of the documents and the evidential documents that you want to provide with your submission. And caveating is really, it's quite a regular occurrence, and it is generally always difficult for a contracting authority and for an evaluator especially. Bids received with caveats about what the bidder will or will not do for a price is really tough and can often result in lower scores. It puts the contracting authority and the evaluator in a really difficult position. In effect, evaluators, what they're trying to do is understand your direct answer to the question, and that will be married up to the price that you've submitted. And so if you were saying, for example, we can do X, but only if Y is in place, that would be really tough to score. So try and avoid caveating unless it's really, really necessary and makes sense. But generally speaking, avoid caveating. The specification match, it can be a challenge sometimes for contracting authorities. What they really want to make sure is that the proposal that is put forward relates to the requirements of the specification. So the winning bidder or bidders, depending on how many will be awarded, must be able to deliver what's in the specification, and your bid submission will be the how of that. So what you write down in terms of how you do that will be contractualized. So you'll be held to account for the specification and what you've written down in terms of your tender submission, in terms of how you would do that in relation to the questions that you're asked. In terms of reusing previous bids, I am a big fan personally actually of reutilising materials. We don't want to reinvent wheels, and the public sector is already fairly admin heavy, both for procurement and for providers. However, it does come with a health warning. If you are reusing previous bids or responses from previous opportunities, make sure you've assessed the relevance to this particular specification, and make sure that you remove any references to other clients or other bids. Make sure that it is super relevant and proportionate to this particular opportunity. But you may reuse case studies, that kind of thing, where they are a good piece of evidence that can be used in multiple opportunities. That lack of evidence really affects that point number 2. If you're asked for evidence, definitely submit it. And depending on the instructions of the opportunity about whether you can submit separate documents as optional evidence, my view would always be, if you can show the contracting authority how you can deliver the services, then you should do so. That's certainly my personal preference, both as a provider and as an evaluator. But do always make sure that you are following the instructions on what you can and can't submit through the particular opportunity. And I talk about awareness of word and page count all of the time. There's so many bids that I've seen where a paragraph has been missed out because it's gone over a word count, or somebody has submitted 3 pages of documentation when it should have been 2. If there is a page count, there is likely to be a standard font that you would need to use. That might be Arial 11, for example. If you are required to use a particular font and size of font, use it, because actually in the checks that could happen when your bid is submitted, you could be found to be non-compliant, and one of 2 things would happen. Your bid may be rejected if it's non-compliant, or it would only be acceptable where the page count cuts off if Arial 11 were used, for example. So in other words, it's never good to go over word or page counts or ignore any of those instructions in there. And in terms of assumptions, never ever assume that evaluators can use information that you haven't written down. So don't assume that they know you, don't assume that they know that you've done some great work somewhere and so that they will score you on it. Any evaluator can only ever score what is written down. And generally speaking, the evaluation process, there will be multiple evaluators per bid, and they will be done independently of each other, and there would usually be a moderation process to reach consensus. At all points, both evaluators and moderators can only take into account what you have put in your submission. Anything else they know won't be used. And don't assume they know what acronyms mean, for example, or that technical terms are known by evaluators. So if you are using an acronym, at least the first time you use it, spell it out and put the acronym next to it in brackets so that the evaluator does know. And if you're using overtly technical terms, so in procurement we would use ITT, the invitation to tender. If we were writing that down in a bid submission response, we would spell that out and explain what an ITT is. So just be aware of the words, language and acronyms that you're using, and don't assume that an evaluator will understand those things. And often SQ compliance can be challenging if you are not meeting or you're not understanding what the selection questionnaire, and that's those threshold questions that we talked about, those gateway questions. If you're not meeting those minimum standards, so if you don't have the accreditation or licenses that you need, the policies in place, procedures, insurances, etc. What you should look out for though on compliance and on gateway questions or threshold questions, the selection questionnaire stuff, is that you won't necessarily need everything at the point that you're submitting your bid. Often the authority will ask you to commit to having whatever it is that you need if you were successful by contract implementation date. So if, for example, you were being asked to have Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus accreditation, usually you wouldn't necessarily need that for the point that you're bidding. You may, however, need that to be able to actually start delivering the service. But those things are always clear in the ITT, so do make sure you read those things in detail. So just going to tell you a little bit actually for the last couple of slides about Go for Growth and how we're helping Durham Police and Crime Commissioner. So we are a marketplace development organisation. What we do all day, every day is support providers so that you can find and secure opportunities to grow your organisation in the public sector. And as you've seen from all the stuff that we've talked about, we're very process related. So we can't answer technical questions or specification questions or pricing and cost questions. They are still for the contracting authority to do, and you would do those through clarifications. But we can help you navigate the process and help to demystify, if you like, what particular things are. And we have a self-service platform. The URL is on screen. It's the Go for Growth Action Planning tool. Under 6 different headings, you can choose from issues or gaps, if you like, that you might identify within your organisation. So, for example, if you are wanting to understand what policies align with public sector needs, there's a whole section on policy in the Go for Growth platform. If you wanted to work with another organisation to submit your bid, there's a section on developing partnerships. Also around accreditations, there's social value support in there, and we're just developing some carbon net zero support as well. But if you go into the programme, you'll see, and again, all of this is free of charge. If you go into the platform through the URL on screen, you'll see those 6 headings. When you click on each of the headings, underneath it will be some issue statements. What effectively you do is choose the ones that are relevant to you. There's just 3 steps, you can see them on screen. So we'll capture some demographic information, then you'll pick your issue statements. And then the 3rd and final step is based on what you've told us at steps 1 and 2, we will support you with resources, tools, templates, video tutorials, there's events, there's all sorts of different multiple channel, multiple type of support in there that will help you get ready to submit your bid for any procurement, not just this Durham Police and Crime Commissioner procurement, but any procurement in the public sector. It's a minimum click, so we have designed this with providers, busy providers in mind. We are one ourselves, so we know that no one wants to sit in front of a computer for any longer than we have to already. So in a minimum of clicks, you should be able to get to support resources that are relevant to your organisation, will help you here and now in a very practical way to both identify and overcome any barriers that you might have for any procurement, including this specific one. And there's also additional support on offer through Go for Growth. So you can book a one-to-one meeting, generally with Lauren or myself, and you can do that through the Microsoft Bookings link on the screen. They are 30 minutes each. You can book multiple meetings. You can book to speak to both of us or one of us. Lauren is generally the first port of call, but you can feel free to book into our calendars. There's also lots of tutorials and guides on our YouTube channel. The access to the YouTube channel is on screen just now. I think there's over 50 videos. So of previous events, the whole event will be on there. So there's a bid masterclass that's 90 minutes. There's another bid masterclass of 60 minutes. There's 3 in total. But what we also do is break those videos down. So if you wanted to know more about evaluation criteria, for example, there's a 6 or 7 minute video on our YouTube channel that explains how evaluation criteria works and how you would use that to your best advantage when you are looking to submit a bid. Go for Growth is quite active on social media. We post updates, as I said, on our LinkedIn page. This is where we'll post the slide deck from today and a YouTube copy of the recording from today's session. But we're also on Facebook and we're also on Twitter, so you can get updates from us from all 3 of those. And we are always running events in Go for Growth. We do lots of webinar type events so that providers from around the whole of the country can get involved. We do also do specific events like this one and also face-to-face events. We are just finalising the second half of 2022, but we've got lots of stuff coming up, such as social value for providers, carbon net zero for providers, how to find opportunities, how to stand out in a crowd as an organisation, what credibility and accreditations look like for public sector, how to look at terms and conditions in public sector contracts. It's not legal advice, however, as practitioners, it's what are the top things to go and look at in this sea of legal terminology. We're looking at policy for public sector. We'll also run an event on frameworks, dynamic purchasing systems and contracts, going through what they each are, how they differ from each other, and how in the new regulatory environment these things may change again in 2023. We'll also be looking at the sourcing playbook and the financial viability risk assessment tool, which is becoming more common in use across. It's already in use in central government, but this is likely to roll out across at least some of the wider public sector this year, at the back end of this year. So we are providing support for providers to understand how that might change a procurement. We'll look at partnerships and collaborations, and we will be doing lots of events on how to develop your bid skills as an organisation for both beginners and for improvers. So if you register to Eventbrite, and the link is on the screen now, you can get your communication automatically from Go for Growth about any of those events. Almost all of them are advertised and registered through Eventbrite, as today was also. And finally, just to finish off, as I said, if you do want to join the Go for Growth programme and access all that support that we talked about, you can do so at the URL that's on screen. Or if you would like any further information, you can get in touch with either myself or Lauren on the contact details on the screen just now. We are here to help, so please do feel free to use that as much as you like. The programme is there to help you. Again, use that as much or as little as you need. And if there is anything else that we can help you with, please do get in touch. Thank you for listening, and I will hand you back over to Lauren for Q&A.